The second is the tragedy of the commons. Everyone's individual interest to exploit a common and limited resource as far as possible, to the detriment of the group's collective interest. Example: each 5 cowboys have 10 excellent cows grazing on land held in common by all, which can only support 50 healthy cows. If one cowboy adds more cows to benefit his herd, this lowers the value of all cows in the field. Everybody suffers from overgrazing, but only the individual cowboy gets the benefit of adding more cows to his herd. Number 2, exploiting a common resource like the carbon-absorbing properties of the planet. Everybody shares in the loss of the common resource, but only the polluter enjoys the benefits of using extra energy and dumping more carbon dioxide into atmosphere. Isn't there a chance that what's best for everyone might figure in the reflections of a prisoner or a cowboy? Is there honor even among thieves? That would be the question. Another way of viewing equal distribution of goods is the historical principle of justice. Justice seems to consist in sharing something out equally, whether something is a burden or a benefit, unless there are good reasons to the contrary, good grounds for departing from this default approach. Historical considerations can matter a lot to the conclusions one reaches about whether the current distribution of benefits or burden is a just one. Justice of a sort only seems to matter when we are dealing with the distribution of finite resource. Are there any morally relevant historical grounds for the present unequal use of the planet's common carbon sinks? There have been no relevant and mutually beneficial agreements between developed and developing countries, but there might be other grounds for thinking that certain inequalities are nevertheless justified. First is John Locke's view. An unequal distribution of a common resource can be better for all concerned than the equal distribution. For John Locke, during his time in England, there is no private property, no private ownership of land, and therefore no organized cultivation. No one has appropriated a common resource. There is no unjust departure from equality, no ground for complaint. However, poorer countries cannot hope to afford what gets produced by the rich nations, high energy economies. This does not stop rich nations charging poorer ones for the things like medicine and agricultural equipment, which is the reason why poor countries have ramped up enormous debts. If rich countries don't charge much to poor countries, then it would be considered just, but that's not the case. Second is from Adam Smith. The rich have something of a right to their wealth because their wealth does not deprive the poor of much and brings to the poor certain benefits. The rich take only what is most precious and divide with the poor the fruits of all their improvements. The rich may take only what is precious, but we are not talking about golds and diamonds. We are talking about carbon sinks. In the case of carbon sinks, burning fossil fuels made the developed countries what they are now, securing the standard of life enjoyed by those in wealthy countries, leaving the poor countries with the same situation and lesser opportunity to enjoy. The current distribution of the benefits and burdens associated with the use of planet's carbon sinks is not just. The developed or high-income countries are using and have used much more than their share, and there are no morally relevant grounds for this inequality. Further, the poor are already enduring some of the costs of climate change in the form of extreme weather events, sea level rise, food and water shortages, and climate shifts. They've also missed out on a share of the sink, and there's a sense in which they've therefore missed out on better lives. It's hard to find historical grounds which might excuse the current distribution of benefits and burdens. The distribution is therefore unjust. Since 1850, the developed countries are responsible for the total of 76% of carbon dioxide emissions, while the developing countries have contributed just 24%. Developed countries are responsible for over 800,000 million metric tons of carbon emitted since 1900. The developing countries, including huge countries like China and India, has contributed much less, just over 213,000 million metric tons. The idea that the distribution is unjust brings us to the polluter pays principle. In Article 16 of Rio Declaration on Environment and Development in 1992, states that national authorities should endeavor to promote the internalization of environmental costs and the use of economic instruments, taking into account the approach that the polluter should, in principle, bear the cost of pollution. However, couldn't a case be made for the claim that the developed countries did not know about the effects of greenhouse gases? Couldn't a case be made for the claim that they certainly did not intend to bring about climate change? Our understanding of the observed properties of atmospheric gases does not exactly depend on research breakthroughs. They are settled already in the year 1990, as the year in which the world could no longer claim ignorance of the effects of emissions. But it has been noted that we have been breaking CO2 since 1950. What we have now experiencing are the effects of our actions from that time. Maybe the developed world has changed the climate entirely accidentally. It neither knew nor should have known that its emissions were doing damage, nor did it intend the damage. But we may belong to the developed countries or developing, we must take part in sustaining the world for the future generation. Who ought to be bound by the demands of sustainability? If that is the question, the answer will then be the demands of sustainability might fall upon us equally. So we must do our part as we live in one planet.